When my parents asked me for $180,000, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't even look surprised. I just opened my bag, pulled out an old bank statement, and slid it across their dining table. My father's face went pale before he even touched it. My mother covered her mouth. And for the first time in 15 years, my golden child brother had nothing smart to say. Because printed across the top of that paper was the name of the account they had emptied when I was 17. Emily's college fund. The same fund they promised would send me to university. The same fund my grandparents contributed to every birthday and Christmas. The same fund my parents secretly drained to pay for my brother's dream. 15 years earlier, when I begged them to explain why they had done it, my father said one sentence that never left me. Your brother needs this money more than you do. Now they were the ones who needed money. And suddenly, they wanted me to remember we were family. Funny how family only mattered when they were the ones asking. My name is Emily Harper. I was 17 when I learned that being the responsible child doesn't always mean you're respected. Sometimes it means you're the easiest one to betray. My family looked normal from the outside. My dad, Richard, worked in construction management. My mom, Susan, was the kind of woman who brought casseroles to sick neighbors and remembered everyone's birthday. My older brother, Jason, was 21, charming, loud, and somehow always forgiven. Then there was me, quiet, bookish, careful, the child who didn't cause problems, the child who got good grades, the child everyone trusted to understand. That word followed me around my entire childhood. When Jason forgot to pick me up from school, I had to understand. When he wrecked Dad's car, I had to understand. When my parents spent hundreds on his hobbies but told me art club was too expensive, I had to understand. When he dropped out of community college after one semester, they called him lost. When I got an A- in chemistry, they asked what happened to the other points. Jason needed patience. I needed discipline. Jason needed support. I needed to be grateful. And for years, I accepted that. Because when you're raised inside unfairness, you don't always recognize it. You just learn the rules. His mistakes were accidents. Mine were character flaws. His dreams were investments. Mine were expenses. The only place I felt like myself was school. I loved the quiet structure of it. Tests made sense. Books made sense. Hard work led to results. At least that was what I believed back then. By junior year, my grades were nearly perfect. My teachers started talking to me about scholarships and competitive universities. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Carter, called me into her office one cold November afternoon and placed 3 brochures in front of me. Emily, I think you should apply to all of these. I stared at the names. They were schools people in our town bragged about when someone else's kid got accepted, not kids like me. These are expensive, I said. Mrs. Carter smiled. Your academic record is strong. You could get a scholarship. Maybe. And your parents mentioned years ago that you and Jason both had college funds. I froze. At college funds. Her smile faded a little. You didn't know? I shook my head. No. She leaned back, surprised. Well, that's good news then. You may have more options than you think. For the rest of the day, I floated. A college fund, for me. Money set aside for my future. For once, it felt like maybe my parents had been quietly rooting for me all along. Maybe they didn't praise me because they expected me to succeed. Maybe they had a plan. That night, I rushed home with the brochures in my backpack and hope sitting bright in my chest. I found my mom in the kitchen, stirring pasta sauce. Dad was at the table, sorting bills. Jason was on the couch, laughing at something on his phone. I talked to Mrs. Carter today, I said. Mom smiled without turning around. That's nice, honey. She said I should apply to some bigger universities. Dad looked up. Bigger usually means expensive. I know, I said carefully. But she mentioned the college fund. The spoon stopped moving. Dad's hand froze over the stack of bills. Jason's laughter stopped for half a second. That was the first warning sign. I just didn't understand it yet. Mom turned around slowly. What did she say? Just that you and Dad started funds for both of us. Dad cleared his throat. Technically, yes. Technically. That word landed strangely. What does technically mean? It means don't start making plans before we talk, he said. I looked at my mother. She gave me a tight smile. Your father just means we need to be practical. Practical. Another word adults use when they were about to disappoint you. Still, I ignored the feeling because I wanted to believe them. Over the next few months, I worked harder than I had ever worked. I wrote application essays after dinner. I studied while Jason played video games in the next room. I took extra shifts tutoring younger students for a little spending money. Mrs. Carter helped me apply for scholarships. My English teacher read my personal statement 3 times and told me it made her cry. For once, people outside my house saw me clearly. They saw effort, potential, a future. At home, things were harder to read. Mom kept asking vague questions. Are you sure you want to go so far away? Wouldn't a local school be easier? Do you really need dorm housing? Dad mostly talked about cost. Jason made jokes. Don't become one of those people who comes home thinking they're better than everyone. I laughed it off, but each comment felt like a small hand pulling me backward. Then the first acceptance letter came, then the second, then a scholarship offer. And finally, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the letter from my dream school arrived. I opened it on the porch because my hands were shaking too badly to wait. The first word was enough. Congratulations. I screamed so loudly our neighbor came outside. For one perfect minute, I forgot everything. The unfairness, the doubt, the weird silences. I ran inside, holding the letter like it was proof that my life was finally becoming mine. Mom read it first. Her face changed so quickly I almost missed it. Surprise, then worry, then something that looked like guilt. Dad came home 20 minutes later. I handed him the letter. He read it once, then again. He didn't hug me. He didn't say he was proud. He asked, how much after scholarships? I already had the numbers ready: tuition, housing, books, meals, scholarship amount, estimated remaining cost. I had printed everything and highlighted the important parts. Dad studied the paper for a long time. Then he looked at Mom. Mom looked down. Jason walked into the kitchen right then, grabbed a soda, and said, "What's with the funeral mood?" Nobody laughed. That was the second warning sign. Dad folded the papers and placed them on the table. "We need to have a family meeting tomorrow." My smile disappeared. A family meeting? Why? Because this affects everyone. I looked at my acceptance letter. My name was on it. My work was behind it. My future was inside it. But somehow, in my father's mind, it belonged to everyone. The next evening, we sat around the dining table. The same table where birthday cakes had been cut, where homework had been checked, where Jason had been forgiven for everything. Dad sat at the head. Mom sat beside him, twisting her wedding ring. Jason leaned back in his chair, like he already knew the ending. I should have noticed that. Dad began with a sigh. "Emily, first, we want you to know we're proud of you." I waited, because when someone starts with praise like that, pain usually comes next. "You've worked hard," Mom said softly. "Very hard." Dad nodded. "But sometimes families have to make difficult decisions." My stomach tightened. What decision? Dad looked at Jason. Jason looked away, then Dad said it. "The college fund isn't available." I blinked. "What do you mean not available?" Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Not for me, for herself." Dad continued. "We had to use most of it." The room went quiet. So quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. "Use it for what?" Jason shifted in his chair. Dad answered before he could. "Your brother had an opportunity." I turned slowly toward Jason. "What opportunity?" Jason lifted his chin. "I'm launching a fitness clothing brand." For a second, I thought I had misunderstood. "A clothing brand?" "It's more than clothes," Jason said. "It's a lifestyle company." I stared at him. "You don't even go to the gym." Dad snapped. "That's not helpful." I looked back at him. "No. What isn't helpful is telling me my college fund is gone because Jason wants to sell tank tops online." Mom flinched. "Emily." "No. How much did you take?" Dad's jaw tightened. "Almost all of it." "Almost all." 2 words, one future erased. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "That money was for college." Dad leaned forward, already wearing the expression he used when he wanted the conversation to end. "It was our money. Grandma and Grandpa gave money for my college. They gave it to us to manage. And you managed it into Jason's pocket." Jason scoffed. Don't be dramatic. I looked at him. Did you know? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. My mother reached for my hand. I pulled away. How long have you known? Dad didn't respond. Mom whispered, a while. A while. Later, I would learn what that meant. But that night, I only knew one thing. They had watched me apply, watched me hope, watched me celebrate. And they had said nothing. Dad finally spoke again. Your brother needs this money more than you do. The sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. I stared at him. What? You're smart, Mom said quickly. You'll find another way. Jason leaned back like the matter was settled. And right there, at 17 years old, I understood my place in the family with perfect clarity. Jason was the child they protected. I was the child they expected to survive the damage. I stood up slowly. My acceptance letter was still on the table. For a moment, I thought about taking it, then I left it there, because that night, it didn't feel like an acceptance letter anymore. It felt like evidence. Evidence that I had earned a future, and my own family had chosen to give it away. I don't remember leaving the dining room. One second, I was staring at my acceptance letter. The next, I was sitting on the back porch, trying to convince myself I hadn't just imagined the last 10 minutes. The spring air was cold, but I barely felt it. All I could hear was my father's voice. Your brother needs this money more than you do. I repeated the sentence in my head over and over, hoping it would somehow make sense. It never did. A few minutes later, the back door opened. Mom stepped outside carrying my acceptance letter. She sat beside me without saying anything. For a while, we just listened to the wind rustling through the trees. Finally, she spoke. You know we love you. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was the wrong thing to say. If that's love, I said quietly, I'd hate to see what disappointment looks like. She looked hurt. We didn't want this to happen. You made it happen. It wasn't that simple. Then explain the simple version. She took a deep breath. Jason came to us almost 2 years ago. My head snapped toward her. 2 years? She nodded. He had this business idea. He was so passionate about it. So you gave him my future? We thought we'd replace the money before you graduated. You thought. She looked down. Your father believed the business would succeed. I stared at her. What did you believe? She didn't answer. That silence hurt more than any excuse could have. The next morning, I woke up hoping the previous night had been a nightmare. It wasn't. My acceptance letter was still folded on my desk. The family meeting still happened. The money was still gone. At school, everyone seemed unusually happy. Seniors were celebrating college decisions. Friends were comparing dorm assignments. One girl was crying because she'd have to choose between 2 universities. I would have loved to have that problem. Mrs. Carter spotted me in the hallway before first period. Emily, she smiled, did your parents celebrate? I froze, my mouth opened. Nothing came out, her smile faded. Come to my office. The moment her door closed, she knew. What happened? I handed her the financial estimate. Then I quietly explained everything. I expected disbelief. Instead, she just sat there, stunned. They used the fund. I nodded. For your brother? Another nod. She leaned back in her chair. In 23 years as a counselor, she stopped herself. I'm so sorry. Those 4 words almost broke me. Not because they fixed anything, because they were the first honest words anyone had said to me. For the next hour, she searched for every possible scholarship, emergency grant, and financial aid program she could find. There were options, but even if I won every scholarship we found, I'd still owe more money than I could realistically borrow. Before I left, she placed a hand on my shoulder. Whatever happens, don't let someone else's decision convince you that your future isn't worth fighting for. I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. That weekend, my grandparents invited everyone over for Sunday dinner. Normally, I loved going there. Grandma's cooking, Grandpa's terrible jokes, the old family photos covering every wall. It was the one place that usually felt safe. Halfway through dinner, Grandma smiled across the table. So, Emily, when do we start shopping for dorm supplies? Every conversation stopped. Dad answered before I could. We're still figuring things out. Grandma frowned. I thought she already chose a university. Dad forced a smile. Plans changed. Something inside me snapped. No. Everyone looked at me. They didn't change. They were changed. Dad's eyes immediately locked onto mine. Emily. No. I turned toward my grandparents. My college fund is gone. Grandma's blinked. What do you mean gone? My parents gave almost all of it to Jason. The room fell silent. Grandpa slowly lowered his fork. Richard. He looked directly at my father. Tell me she's mistaken. Dad sighed dramatically. It isn't how she's making it sound. I couldn't believe he was still trying to control the story. So explain it. Grandpa's voice was calm, dangerously calm. Dad hesitated. Jason wanted to start a business. Grandma frowned. And? We invested in it. Grandpa looked at Jason. What business? Jason straightened in his chair. A premium fitness apparel brand. Grandpa asked one simple question. How much have you sold? Jason hesitated. We're still preparing for launch. So, Grandpa leaned forward. There isn't actually a business yet. Jason looked at Dad for help. None came. Grandma slowly turned toward my parents. You emptied Emily's education savings. For an idea? Mom tried to explain. We believed in him. Grandma's expression hardened. And who believed in Emily? Nobody answered. Grandpa looked at me. When did you find out? 3 days ago. His eyebrows shot up. You mean they let you apply to universities? Knowing the money was already gone. I nodded. Grandma covered her mouth. Oh, sweetheart. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm so sorry. Dad pushed his chair back. This is becoming inappropriate. Grandpa didn't even look at him. No. What was inappropriate? What was stealing from one child to gamble on another? The drive home was unbearable. No music, no conversation, just silence. The moment we walked through the front door, Dad turned around. You embarrassed us. I stared at him. I embarrassed you? That discussion had no business happening in front of your grandparents. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My college fund had no business disappearing. It wasn't your money. It was saved for my education. It belonged to this family. No, it belonged to the future you promised me. Mom suddenly burst into tears. I can't do this. There it is, I said quietly. What? The tears. They always come when someone tells the truth. She looked genuinely shocked. How can you say that? Because somehow, I'm comforting you after you took everything from me. Over the next few weeks, the house became emotionally exhausting. Dad acted like nothing had happened. Mom tried to overcompensate by cooking my favorite meals. Jason avoided me completely. Until one afternoon, I came home from school early and found him in the garage. Brand new shelves lined the walls. There were expensive lights, professional photography equipment, boxes filled with clothing samples. A high-end laptop sat on a desk beside an industrial printer. I slowly looked around. Everywhere I looked, I saw my college fund. Jason noticed me. What? I shook my head. So this is what my degree looks like. He rolled his eyes. You're still on that? My entire future? Yeah. He laughed. You'll figure something out. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel, because they were familiar. I'd heard them before, from Mom, from Dad. It wasn't just Jason talking anymore. It was everything they'd taught him, that someone else would always clean up the mess. I looked around the garage one last time. The camera, the printer, the equipment, the unopened boxes. Then I noticed something strange. Several of the boxes still had return labels attached. And taped to one shelf was an envelope from the bank. I couldn't read it from where I stood, but one thing caught my attention. It had my father's handwriting on it, and underneath, just barely visible, were 3 words that made my stomach tighten. College savings account. I had a feeling my parents hadn't told me the whole truth. And something told me the real story was about to get much, much worse. I couldn't stop thinking about the envelope. For the rest of the evening, it stayed in the back of my mind. College savings account. Dad had always insisted there was nothing left, so why was there still paperwork? More importantly, why was it hidden in the garage instead of the filing cabinet where he kept every other financial document? For the first time since the family meeting, a new thought entered my mind. What if they hadn't told me everything? The opportunity came 2 days later. Dad and Mom left early Saturday morning for a neighborhood barbecue. Jason had driven across town to meet a graphic designer for his clothing brand. For the first time in weeks, I had the house to myself. I wasn't looking for revenge, I was looking for the truth. Dad's office was exactly as he always left it: neat, organized, every folder labeled, every drawer locked except one. Inside had a thick blue binder marked financial records. My hands were shaking as I opened it. At first, everything looked ordinary: mortgage statements, insurance papers, utility bills. Then I found another folder: education savings. My heart started racing. Inside were bank statements stretching back nearly 5 years. I flipped through them one by one. The first few looked normal: monthly deposits, birthday contributions from my grandparents, holiday checks, interest earned. Exactly what I expected. Then, 18 months before my graduation, the withdrawals began: $5,000, $8,000, $3,000, $12,000, another 10. Each withdrawal was labeled differently: business development, equipment, consulting, marketing. One payment simply said luxury vehicle down payment. I froze. A vehicle? Jason had told everyone he bought his SUV with money he'd saved. That had been a lie. I kept turning pages. Every statement revealed something worse: designer furniture, a business retreat in Arizona, premium software subscriptions, even a family vacation to Florida. I recognized the dates immediately. That vacation had been my reward for finishing junior year with honors. Dad had proudly called it a family celebration. I remembered thanking them. Now I knew the truth. I had unknowingly thanked them for spending my own college fund. Then I found something that made my stomach drop. Tucked inside the folder was a printed email from Jason to Dad. Subject: need another transfer. I started reading. Dad, the investors backed out. If I don't pay the manufacturer this week, everything falls apart. I know Emily's fund still has enough left. She won't need it for another year anyway. We'll replace it once sales start. Trust me. I read the message again, then a third time. Jason knew. Not only did he know, he had asked for more, and Dad had agreed. I looked at the attached response. I'll move the money tomorrow. Don't tell your mother until it's done. Emily doesn't need to know unless something goes wrong. The email was dated 16 months before I graduated. 16 months. They hadn't made one desperate decision. They had made dozens. Every transfer had been a choice. I quickly photographed every page, every email, every statement, every receipt. Not because I planned to sue anyone, not because I wanted revenge, because I suddenly realized something important. For months, my parents had been rewriting history. Whenever the subject came up, they made it sound like a single difficult decision. It wasn't. It had been a long series of deliberate choices, and now I had proof. That evening, Dad noticed I was unusually quiet. You've barely said 2 words. I'm thinking. About what? The truth. His expression changed. What does that mean? Instead of answering, I pulled out my phone. I opened one of the photographs. Then I slid it across the dinner table. Dad looked down. The color drained from his face. Mom leaned over his shoulder. Her fork slipped from her hand and clattered onto the floor. Jason immediately recognized the document. Where did you get that? So you recognize it? No one answered. I opened another image, then another. The email, the bank transfers, the receipts. The silence around the table became unbearable. Finally, Dad spoke. You went through my office? I found my future. His voice hardened. Those were private records. So was my college fund. Jason stood up so quickly his chair tipped backward. You had no right. I laughed. No right. You asked Dad to take more money. It wasn't like that. I tapped the screen. I have the email. He stared at me, then at Dad, then back at me. For the first time in my life, Jason looked nervous. Mom started crying, real tears this time. Not the quiet tears she used to end arguments. These were different. She looked at Dad. You told me there were only a couple of transfers. Dad didn't respond. She grabbed one of the statements. There are dozens. Another page. Richard, you said we'd stop. Another page. You said this was temporary. Dad buried his face in his hands. I thought he'd succeed. Mom looked at him in disbelief. So every time he asked, you just kept giving him more? Jason tried interrupting. It wasn't only for me. I looked at him. The Florida vacation? The SUV? The designer furniture? His mouth opened, nothing came out. That night changed something, not just for me, for Mom. Until then, she'd convinced herself she was simply supporting her husband. Now she was staring at years of decisions she hadn't fully understood. She quietly left the table. I heard her crying upstairs. Dad remained in his chair for almost an hour. He never apologized. Instead, he kept repeating the same sentence. I thought I could fix it. But every time he tried to fix Jason's life, he broke mine a little more. A week later, I made the hardest decision of my life. I stopped waiting for my parents to make things right. I deferred my admission to my dream university. I accepted a full-time administrative job at a small insurance company. The salary wasn't impressive, the work wasn't exciting, but it came with one thing my parents could no longer give me: a future I controlled. I rented a tiny apartment with 2 roommates. The kitchen was barely big enough for one person. The furniture came from thrift stores. The mattress rested on the floor because I couldn't afford a bed frame. But every bill I paid, every meal I cooked, every paycheck I earned belonged to me. No one could take those away. Over the next several years, my parents called less and less. Birthdays became short conversations. Holidays became optional. Jason's business slowly disappeared from family conversations. No one talked about product launches anymore. No one mentioned investors. The expensive garage equipment quietly vanished. Whenever relatives asked how the business was doing, Dad always gave the same answer. He's restructuring. Eventually. Even that answer disappeared. Life moved on. I finished my degree by taking night classes while working full-time. It took twice as long. But when I finally walked across that graduation stage, no one had paid for that moment except me. I wasn't just earning a diploma. I was proving something to myself. Then promotions came, a better job, a management position, a house, a life I had built from the ground up. I thought the story was finally over. I was wrong, because 15 years after my parents emptied my college fund, my phone rang. The caller ID read Dad. I almost ignored it. Then he left a voicemail. His voice sounded older, tired, almost defeated. Emily, I don't know who else to ask. For the first time in 15 years, the people who had always expected me to figure things out had run out of answers themselves. I listened to my father's voicemail 3 times before calling him back. Each time his voice sounded smaller. Not weak, just tired. The confidence that had once filled every room he walked into was gone. When I finally returned the call, he answered on the first ring. Emily. Hi, Dad. There was a long pause. I wasn't sure you'd call. I almost didn't. I understand. Another silence. Then he quietly asked, could you come over this weekend? What is this about? It's, complicated. I closed my office door and looked out the window. The city below buzzed with people living their own lives, completely unaware that mine had just collided with the past. Is Mom okay? He sighed. She's been diagnosed with a heart condition. My stomach tightened. Is it serious? The doctors are optimistic. But treatment is expensive. There it was, the reason for the phone call. Not an apology, not reconciliation, need. I'll come by Saturday. Walking into my childhood home felt like stepping into a museum. The furniture hadn't changed. The hallway still displayed framed family photos. But now I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. Almost every picture celebrated Jason. His baseball trophies, his birthdays, his high school graduation, his vacations. There were pictures of me too, usually standing beside someone else, smiling politely, almost blending into the background. I wondered how I had never noticed. Or maybe I had. Maybe I'd just stopped expecting anything different. Mom hugged me the moment I walked in. She looked older than I remembered. Her hair had more gray. Her smile seemed heavier. I'm so glad you came. I wanted to see how you were doing. She nodded. I'm trying. Dad led us into the dining room. The same table, the same chairs, the same room where 15 years earlier, my future had quietly disappeared. For a moment, I was 17 again. Then Dad placed a folder in front of me. Inside were overdue mortgage notices, medical bills, credit card statements, past due utility payments. The numbers were staggering. Dad folded his hands. I lost a construction business 2 years ago. I looked up. I didn't know. I didn't tell anyone. Mom quietly added, "We used our retirement savings trying to keep it alive." I kept reading. Then I asked a question I already knew the answer to. "What about Jason?" Dad looked away. Mom answered, "We helped him." "How much?" She swallowed hard. "Too much. He never recovered after the business failed. He went through a divorce. He lost his house. And we kept believing one more chance would fix everything." I slowly closed the folder. "So after my college fund, you kept giving him money?" Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. The paperwork told the story. Finally, Dad looked directly at me. "We need help." There it was, the sentence I'd expected from the moment I heard his voicemail. "We're about 6 months away from losing the house." Mom reached across the table. "We're not asking you to solve everything." Dad interrupted quietly. "We're asking if you could loan us $180,000. The room became perfectly still. The number echoed in my mind. 180,000, almost exactly what my college education would have cost after tuition, housing, books, and interest. I wasn't sure whether the similarity was coincidence or irony. Dad must have seen the expression on my face. He quickly added, "We'll pay you back." I almost smiled. Those were the exact words they'd used 15 years earlier. "We'll replace the money." The promise sounded just as impossible now as it had then. I looked at both of them for a long time. Then I reached into my briefcase. Dad's shoulders relaxed. Mom looked hopeful. They thought I was pulling out a checkbook. Instead, I placed a single sheet of paper on the table. Dad recognized it immediately. It was the first bank statement I'd photographed years ago. Across the top, in bold letters, Emily Harper Education Savings Account, highlighted in yellow, were the first large withdrawals. Neither parent said a word. I quietly turned the page. The printed email from Jason. "I know Emily's fund still has enough left." Another page, Dad's reply. "I'll move the money tomorrow." Another page, the vacation expense, the SUV payment, the consulting invoices, every decision, every transfer, every choice. I wasn't showing them anything they hadn't seen before. I was reminding them. Because time has a way of softening memories. Evidence doesn't. "I carried these papers with me for years," I said. "Not because I wanted revenge. Because every time I started wondering if maybe I was being too harsh, I read them. They reminded me that this wasn't one mistake. It was hundreds of decisions." Dad lowered his head. "I know. No. You know now. You didn't know when I was 17. You didn't know when I worked full-time while taking night classes. You didn't know when I skipped meals because I couldn't afford groceries. You didn't know when I watched my classmates graduate 4 years before I did." Mom quietly cried. "I never imagined it would hurt you this much." I looked at her gently. "That's the problem. You never imagine." Dad's voice cracked. "If I could do it again, I wouldn't choose the same." I believed him. For the first time in years, I truly believed him. But belief and trust aren't the same thing. "I forgive you," I said softly. Both of them looked up. Hope returned to their faces. Then I finished the sentence. "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences." The hope disappeared. "I'm not giving you $180,000. Dad closed his eyes. "I understand." "I don't think you do. I'm saying no because I finally learned something healthy families understand. Love and money are not the same thing. If I rescue you today, I become part of the same cycle that destroyed all of us. The cycle where Jason never had to face the consequences of his choices, and everyone else paid the price." I stood up. Then I looked at my mother. "I will help you." Both of them looked surprised. I continued. "I'll pay directly for the heart specialist your doctor recommended. I'll cover your medications for the next year. I'll even help you find a financial counselor. But I will not hand over a blank check. Not to anyone." Dad frowned. So you're willing to help, just not the way we asked. Exactly. For the first time in my life, I'm helping without enabling. No one argued because deep down, they knew I was right. Over the next year, things slowly changed. My parents sold the family house and moved into a small apartment. It wasn't easy, but it stopped the financial bleeding. Dad found part-time consulting work. Nothing glamorous, just honest work. Mom's treatment went well. Her health gradually improved. Jason finally took responsibility for his own life. He found a steady job with a regional sporting goods company. No investors, no shortcuts, no rescue, just work. Ironically, it was the first time I'd ever seen him genuinely proud of himself. Sometimes people don't grow because someone saves them. They grow because no one can. As for me, I finished paying off my student loans. I renovated my first home. I started a scholarship fund at my old high school. Every year, one hardworking student who couldn't afford college receives help from that fund. Not because I can erase what happened to me, but because I can stop it from happening to someone else. A few months later, a handwritten letter arrived from my father. Inside was a single page. No excuses, no requests, just one sentence. I spent years protecting the child I thought was weakest and nearly lost the one who was strongest. I folded the letter and placed it beside my graduation photo, not as a reminder of the pain, but as proof that some people eventually learn, even if they learn too late. Looking back now, I don't think the money was the greatest loss. Money can be earned again. Trust takes much longer. If you're always the responsible one in your family, remember this. Being kind doesn't mean saying yes to everything. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for the people you love is refuse to continue a cycle that has already hurt everyone involved. Now, I'd love to hear your opinion. If you were in my position, would you have loaned your parents the money, or would you have drawn the same boundary? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them, and your perspective might help someone facing a similar situation. And if you enjoy powerful family stories with unexpected twists, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one.